Onay Kasab, National Lead Officer for Unite. Hi, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us on the programme. Had its second reading yesterday. The government moving on with it.
Yes, it's predictable, unfortunately. But look, this legislation, it's unworkable, it's undemocratic, and it's unnecessary. And I think the last point is probably the most important. It's unnecessary because if you take the NHS, for example, we've been prepared to sit down and negotiate minimum staffing levels whenever there's been strike action. Now, with this legislation, instead of that negotiation being with clinical medical specialists, that would be potentially with the Secretary of State, with Stephen Barclay, deciding what's safe in a hospital. I'd rather rely on a medical clinician. So it's completely unnecessary. Look, it also fails to deal with the cost of living crisis. It fails to deal with the crisis in the NHS. And we had an ocean of crocodile tears from Conservative ministers saying this is about patient safety. It's not. If they really cared about patient safety, they wouldn't be talking about minimum staffing levels during strike action. They'd be talking about safe staffing levels every single day of the year.
So how is it unworkable and how is it undemocratic?
It's undemocratic because we can go through a legal process at the moment where people can vote to take strike action, exercising a democratic mandate. So
police can't?
Police can't. No. The police can't, and my personal view is that the police should have that right. But that's
so you think
another
the police
argument.
Should be able to go on strike? I
think the police should have the right to be able to be balloted to take strike action. I think I treat them as workers, just like any other worker.
What do you think might happen if the police went on strike?
Well, that's for the police to discuss. We don't represent police officers, so it's undemocratic because people take part in a ballot and have the right to be able to take strike action. It's unworkable because if you actually look at the detail of the legislation, there's, in fact, very little detail in there. Who decides who's going to be able to take strike action and who's not going to take strike action in the workplace? Who decides what proportion it's going to be? Who decides which individuals are going to be told you can't take strike action? And none of that detail is actually in the legislation. So as it stands, it's actually unworkable.
Do you not think that patients, let's say NHS workers, if we don't have a minimum level, patients' lives are at risk?
I completely agree with you, OK. I think there should be safe staffing levels in the NHS every single day of the year. Now, the irony here is that during the industrial action in the NHS, we were negotiating minimum staffing levels that in some cases were better than on non-striking days. So I would support, my union would support, a debate around safe staffing levels in the NHS every single day. You know, only 25% of shifts have the planned numbers of staff on them.
But is it not compounded then by NHS workers going on strike?
Well, no, because we negotiate minimum levels, emergency cover, when there is strike action. And also our members in the NHS have made clear that this dispute is not just about pay. Pay is inextricably linked to staffing, recruitment and retention, safety, and therefore the service in the NHS. OK,
let me ask you about the amendment, though, that the Lords have put forward. They had, I think, several amendments. One of them, if accepted, would mean that allowing strikes to happen without workers being sacked. If accepted, would that not provide protection for workers?
It would certainly make the bill better, but the reality is that we have a raft of anti-trade union legislation that is in at the moment. We have hurdles that we have to jump over. This is going to be just another hurdle, and we'll jump over this one as well. But it's simply not necessary, and it doesn't deal with the fundamental problems. It doesn't deal with the cost of living crisis.
OK. Mick Lynch, we all know who Mick Lynch is, says there'll be a mass campaign of workplace disobedience if that goes through. Would you encourage your members to join in that? Well,
we'll look at creative ways to get round the legislation. So, for instance...
No, but I'm asking specifically, he said mass campaign of workplace disobedience. Is that something that you would want your members to join in on?
Well, we'll look at ways of getting round the legislation, for instance, such as action short of strike action, which actually could end up prolonging disputes and disputes taking longer. But on Mick's comments, I'm not surprised that when people's legitimate legal rights are under attack, I'm not surprised if people then turn around and say, well, we're not going to play by the rules. OK, but they wouldn't be legal, would they? They'd be illegal if the law was brought in. Sorry, what would be illegal?
The rights that workers enjoy at the moment, they would be illegal.
Well, thankfully, we can still take strike action. But as I said, we will look at creative ways of getting around this legislation. Now, that could include action short of strikes. Now, the irony there is that that actually ends up prolonging a dispute. Our union has been involved in some 600 disputes over the last 15 months, winning 80% of those. And I'm glad to say that the vast majority have been settled without strike action having to take place. So it's an unnecessary piece of legislation.
It's good to see you. Thanks very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.